You have to love yourself a fire.
Alright, welcome back to Honored Madman. I hope everybody's doing well. Today we're going to talk about a pair of America's secret children, which I guess is a bit of a broad term considering that Mog and Morgoth are also technically secret children of America, and then there's also those poor bastards in the mausoleums. But today we're specifically going to focus on Melina, our ally and companion throughout the game, and Messmer, a boss from the DLC, the poster child, if you will. So they're stated to be siblings in an admittedly vague text description, but unlike just about every other demigod in the game, their parentage is a bit unclear. We obviously know Marika is the mother, but we don't know who the father's supposed to be, and I don't think it's a guarantee that it's Radagon. They also very notably are not shard bearers like the rest of their demigod brothers and sisters and step-siblings, and that's mainly due to the fact that they weren't able to participate in the Shattering. Messmer was off in the Shadow Realm burning the Hornsent, and Melina is burnt and bodiless, basically stuck in a ghost form, wandering around the lands between with her trusty steed Torrent. They weren't able to seize a shard of the Elden Ring for themselves. But yeah, we're going to try and unravel these two's secrets, as well as where their fire may have been inherited from, or where it came from in general. And yeah, this one might get a little rambly, as these tend to, but we're going to find ourselves some answers today. So let's start with the poster child of the DLC himself, Messmer the Impaler. This guy was one of Marika's first children. I don't know if he was the first. I think that was Godwyn, but, who knows. But Messmer is one of the earlier children. So Messmer is the son of Marika and probably Radagon. Some believe his dad was a fire giant, or maybe even the fell god of the fire giants. And that's obviously something that's up for debate, but what is known about Messmer here mainly has to do with his actions in the Shadow Realm, which makes sense since that's where he was introduced. He and his sister Melina, being Marika's oldest kids, suggest that they were born at some point during the Age of the Crucible, likely before Marika ever even met Godfrey. Now, on the surface, it does seem most likely that Radagon is their father, but there's a good chance that he didn't even exist at this point yet. I mean, who knows if Marika had even had the ability to split herself into a second form, at least at that point before she became a true god. Now, that of course opens up a number of possibilities as to who Messmer's father is, and like I said a little bit ago, some believe that it's the fell god of the giants, and I think that that's definitely a possibility. I've seen other suggestions like that it could be Placidusix, the dragon Elden Lord. Now, I think it's a possibility. I mean, maybe that's why Messmer is so associated with serpents, especially winged ones. I mean, they could be viewed as lesser dragons. But I don't think it's that cut and dry either. I mean, as far as it goes, we really have no idea who the father of these two is. Not much is known about Messmer's early life, or really much before he was sent into the Shadow Realm. All we really know is that he was friends with Gaius, who is this big Albinauric boar rider. He's sort of like this homage to the King Bulblin from Twilight Princess. And we know that the two of them were like older brothers to Radahn, which leads me to believe that the Redmanes, the followers of Radahn, were inspired by their lord's good friend Messmer, who is known for flames. And it could be why the Redmanes are so associated with flame by the time we meet them, because they're sort of carrying on Messmer's legacy with these flames. I mean, flames that Messmer himself hated. He couldn't stand his flames, but he was basically the only one. See, that's the thing with flames and fire and the lands between and the world of Elden Ring. All forms of it are pretty much always described as having this seductive allure to it. There's several examples, but the most notable one I can think of is definitely the Fire Monks. They were originally known as the Fire Guardians, and they were appointed by Marika to tend and watch over the Giant's Flame, to guard it, if you will. But over time, all their rituals became sort of warped, and they eventually sort of fell to the seduction of the Giant's Flame, the Flame of Ruin, and began worshipping it. Some of these monks would encounter the god-slaying black flame that we're going to talk about later, and they would get seduced by that flame and turn their back on the Flame of Ruin to serve the black flame. There's also always a corrupting nature to fire. I mean, look at the ghost flame. There were these guys known as the Fallen Hawks, and they essentially burned their dead in the ghost flame to stay warm. but it mutated them into these little hollow goblin guys with really cool helmets who seem to have lost their mind. Not to get too off topic, but in the Elden Ring world, flame is often associated with seduction. Snakes as well are more overtly depicted as these traitors to the Erd Tree for some reason, but they're also known for tempting the gods. I mean, look at the story of Rykard. His goal was to burn the Erd Tree, and to accomplish this dream, he fed himself to a giant serpent, becoming one with it. And most of his knights sort of agree that Rykard was noble before he fed himself to the serpent, and that the serpent got in his ear and corrupted him. We don't know the actual truth, but it seems like it's definitely a possibility. So there's plenty of reasons why Messmer would hate these flames, but to make matters worse, a entity known as the Abyssal Serpent would be sealed behind his right eye. In fact, his right eye was removed altogether and replaced with a Rune of Marika, presumably to help seal in that Abyssal Serpent, which we can actually see in the boss cutscene. It looks like one of those snake bushes from Bloodborne to me. And throughout his life, even before he had the Abyssal Serpent sealed within him, he had these two companions, his winged serpents. Supposedly, they were sort of like his friends, companions, and advisors. They offered him wisdom. I imagine they helped keep the bigger serpent contained after it got stuffed inside him. Now, one interesting thing it says about this Abyssal Serpent is that it's presumably trying to devour Messmer's flames. Obviously, this is to no avail, and it's actually sort of just blending with the flames. But I thought it was interesting that this isn't the only place where the symbology of flames and serpents are connected. So first things first, there was the Glomite Queen, who was associated with a god-killing black flame, and her servants were famously these beings known as the Godskin Apostles. They're described as having an inhuman physiology, but if you take a look at them and their movements, they're very serpent-like, or at the very least reptilian. I mean, look at the Godskin Noble's tail. Now, we'll talk more about them in the Melina section of this video because they're more associated with her. We'll get to all that. For now, though, let's get to my main example. So there's the obvious one that I already talked about a little bit, Eiglay. That's a giant snake that's associated with fire, and I know they use the word magma because it lives in a volcano, but it's still a snake that's overtly associated with fire. So it definitely counts, and that paired with the big snakes on that bowl that holds the Flame of Ruin has to indicate that flames in general have some sort of direct connection to snakes, but Messmer's situation is a little bit different. He was born with the flames and only later had the giant serpent sealed behind his eye. However, it is also mentioned that those winged serpents were always with him, so perhaps they were also with him at his birth too. But the reason why Messmer isn't just as simple as a guy having an overt connection with an eldritch snake, it's because as far as we know, he wasn't born with it. And it's mentioned in a text description in-game that the serpent is maybe trying to eat the flames within Messmer, so perhaps this big snake is just trying to become whole again, or it's trying to consume fire. Maybe that's what the snakes were doing with the fire giants. Maybe they were never overtly connected with fire at all. They were just trying to steal it from the giants. And now this one's trying to steal it from Messmer. But anyway, aside from literally transforming into the Abyssal Serpent after he's removed the Soreseal from his eye hole, he can also summon these big-ass snakes like he's Orochimaru or something like that, and they do somewhat resemble these serpents on the giant's flame bowl. That leads me to believe there must be some connection there. And as I already mentioned, there are those several statues of the big-winged snakes decorating Volcano Manor, which leads me to believe Messmer's pet serpents and Eiglay might be connected as well. Maybe the pet serpents aren't connected to the Abyssal one, but instead are some sort of offspring of Eiglay, because look at all these statues. The winged serpents that we do briefly see in the game don't seem to be particularly malevolent. I mean, they just seem loyal. Messmer's at least seem to be his lifelong companions, although admittedly he probably didn't have much of a say in that partnership. It's entirely possible that he was born with the winged serpents as part of him. But I'm getting off track here. What are some other instances of serpents having some sort of connection to fire? So we already mentioned how there's these giant stone snakehead statues on the flame bowl of the fire giants. They look a bit like the serpents that Messmer summons, but I think they also resemble the world serpents of Dark Souls 1, you know, Koth and Frampt. This could just be a fun little reference to Dark Souls 1. I mean, there's two snake statues on a big bowl of a fire, a legendary fire that can burn anything. And maybe that's a little bit of a reach saying that they look like Koth and Frampt, but they don't look like any of the serpents that we saw in the base game. They do somewhat look like the ones that Messmer is able to summon in his second phase, but it's not that close. The snake that stands out the most, though, is the one he apparently turns into. I mean, we see his shadow turn into a snake shadow, which of course reminded me of Thulsa Doom from Conan the Barbarian, which to me has more rewatchability than the Lord of the Ring movies. And that's not me knocking those. Those have a lot of rewatchability. I just prefer the first Conan movie. The most noticeable thing about this serpent is that, just like Messmer, it's missing its right eye. Now that's led some to believe that it's his true form, but personally I just believe he merged. I don't think he was born a serpent. I think that after so long of having the serpent within him, once that seal's gone, he sort of just merges with it, not unlike Rykard, but in a much less violent way because, Rykard fed himself to the serpent. Seems like serpents in the Lands Between have a history of this behavior. They just have different ways of going about it. But anyway, I started wondering, where is this serpent's eye? Where's Messmer's eye? And is their eye one and the same? I came up with a rather obvious answer. Perhaps that one big ol' eye in the fire giant, maybe that's Messmer's missing eye. Maybe for whatever reason, Marika sealed Messmer's fire eye inside the giant. Could explain why the serpent's also missing an eye. Perhaps Marika split the Fell God in two, sealing the snake form in her son and the eye in the last fire giant, and then forcing it to tend the Flame of Ruin, because maybe she would need it one day, or it was just beyond her scope to destroy. There's a lot of stuff we don't know about Marika. But I think it's safe to assume that, at the very least, Messmer inherited his fire from the Fell God of the Giants. Now, whether this is a curse like how Malenia's Scarlet Rot is, or if the Fell God is actually his dad is, up in the air. Despite eventually forming a Zoroastrian-style cult based around his flames, there was one thing that Messmer truly loved. Much like the Omen King Morgott, Messmer loved the Erd Tree, and he did his duty gracefully, although this could somewhat be due to the fact that he had a sore seal in place of his right eye, which sort of forced him to do his duty as a kind of a side effect of keeping the abyssal serpent that was sealed within him at bay. But even though he is literally the picture of blasphemy, he's associated with snakes and fire, the two things the Erd Tree hates the most. He was probably its strongest champion. I mean, this guy loved the Erd Tree. He's even got one growing in a secret garden in his shadow tower. Now, moving on to what he's most known for, his burning crusades. Once his mom became a god, she had a singular purpose for her serpentine son. See, Marika's people, the shaman, were rounded up by the Hornsen and whipped to death with these nasty tooth whips, and then stuffed into jars with the corpses of other criminals and unfortunate sons of bitches. This was, of course, something that Marika could not let slide or forget. So she appoints Messmer here to effectively commit a genocide on the Hornsent people. And this is something that he is highly effective at. He kills their divine beasts, their sculpted keepers, burns the places of worship like the Chapel of the Bud, inadvertently creating the Scarlet Rot in the process. We basically see it all briefly covered in the trailer we got for the DLC. Now, this wasn't a task he would accomplish alone. When he entered the Shadow Realm, the bulk of his forces were made up of the Black Knights. Every demigod has their knights, and Messmer was no different, and his knights appear to be the very best, and some of them even come equipped with a twin blade. The commanders of the Black Knights, Andreas and Hugh, were particularly blessed with the strength of the Crucible, and they were 100% loyal to Messmer until they learned the truth, his serpentine nature, that he housed a giant one-eyed snake that might just be his true form. Messmer naturally was heartbroken by this, and he couldn't bring himself to kill these men, so he imprisoned them in these burial tombs, quietly mourning the loss of two of his favorite comrades. At least he still had Gaius. Now, the Black Knights were hardly the entirety of his forces. He also had a number of Messmer soldiers who originally were just ill-fated members of the Penal Battalion, the hooded soldiers that you can commonly find at Stormvale. And he either had them press-ganged into service or they volunteered to serve him for redemption or for freedom. But they in particular seem to have taken to his flame in some small way. These soldiers too were somewhat blessed by the Crucible. They can do these little earthquake attacks. They wield either axes or spears, but they're pretty cool soldiers. Unlike most other demigods, he didn't just have one order of knights that was loyal to him, he also had the Fire Knights. They were essentially a cult who used fire incantations out of loyalty to Messmer, attempting to mimic his own flames. The Messmer fan club, essentially, and a few of them have their own little unique stories, like Salza the Sage, a guy who supposedly hated violence yet burned countless Hornsent villages, or the loner Wigo who used fire to resurrect the dead. Messmer also famously ordered the construction of several furnace golems that were essentially giant sentient, well, not really sentient, but giant weaponized wicker men. These giant weapons of war were basically filled to the brim with the countless casualties of Messmer's crusades, mainly the Hornsent, but also some dragons and other races like the Blood Fiends, for example. The golems bared imagery of fire giants and the fell god, which was said to haunt the sagas of the Hornsent. So this is sort of like how the Golden Order has the Omen Killers wear the elder masks, because Omen are haunted by the spirits of elders. It's a form of psychological warfare. It's also sort of a trend in the Lands Between to use imagery of the fire giants when you're building something associated with fire, like those mobile flamethrowers that you'll see in Caelid or Liurnia in the Lands Between, and they're sort of made in the image of the face of a fire giant. There's even a shield based on this. So Messmer had a lot of people loyal to him. Suffice it to say, he must have been quite the charismatic fellow. His greatest ally besides the winged serpents, though, was none other than the younger sister of the Lunar Queen herself. So it turns out Rennala, the Queen of Caria, had a sister named Rellana, who was essentially a princess of Caria, who was instructed in the arts of sorcery by Ymir, the finger sorcerer, but she chose to abandon her birthright and her fate as a princess of Caria, and instead threw in her lot with Messmer and joined him in the Shadow Realm as his blade. Like many others in this story and the world of the Lands Between, she too was seduced by either fire or a serpent, but in this case it was a little bit of both. And of course, being nobility, she too was able to bring a bunch of her followers with her to the Shadow Realm to bolster Messmer's forces. She commands a fairly large garrison of her own forces combined with Messmer's at a very Carian-style castle known as Castle Ensis. It acts as sort of a checkpoint between the Shadow Tower and the Gravesite Plain where we start the DLC. So besides those couple Black Knights I mentioned earlier, the Impaler's forces were fanatically loyal to their lord. Many of them attempted to use his flames for themselves to honor their lord. Now, not all were as successful as the Fire Knights, but there were a good handful of these shadow spirits. In fact, there's actually a fuckload of them. They're pretty much reading books all throughout the specimen storeroom. And at first I thought they were just, Hornsent shadow ghosts like the other ones we find throughout the game, but upon closer inspection, these ones aren't Hornsent, apparently. And they walk around carrying these little staffs casting fire serpent at you. And I guess since this Shadow Tower is the source of this fiery snake cult, these guys could just be new acolytes who died in the Lands Between and found their way out here. I actually don't know how these shadow spirits are created. I had assumed it was a side effect of what was done to the Hornsent and why the people appeared that way. But if some of Messmer's loyalists are also shadow spirits, that sort of complicates things. For now, I can only assume that this is the non-combat wing of Messmer's forces. Either that or they're like new initiates to his cause. More servants of the serpent, just like the depraved perfumers of the Lands Between, or even Rykard's organization, but in a bizarre twist, these serpent worshippers are actually in service to the Erdtree rather than against it. They're loyal to Messmer completely, and they've chosen to either ignore or embrace his serpentine nature. They serve him no matter how outwardly blasphemous he appears.
2-3 years ago, it was just another snake cult. Now, everywhere. It is said that they are deceivers. They murder people in the night. I know nothing.
So there's definitely some things I probably repeated too much or forgot to mention about Messmer, but let's move on. There's always time to talk about him in future videos. But on to Melina though, because I feel like we've had way more time to marinate on her character, the theories surrounding her, and her purpose in the overall narrative. We've had time with this one.
Through the darkness of future past, the magician longs to see one chance out between two worlds. Fire, walk with me.
So being that she's the character that we arguably spend the most time with throughout the game, we know a lot about her and her role in the greater narrative. And we may not know definitively what her exact origins are, but I think we can speculate pretty clearly based on the clues we get. She's a child of the goddess Marika the Eternal, and like many of Marika's kids, something wasn't quite right about her. In this case, she bore a vision of fire where others like Morgott and Mog got the omen horns, and Melania got the bud of the scarlet rot. She was also born with an innate connection to destined death, which was something that Marika wasn't too fond of. And sure, many have taken this and her hair color as a sign that she is the child of a singular god, in this case Marika and Radagon, since they're essentially two aspects of the same whole. But we see from how Morgott and Mog got the curse of the omen horns that Marika's bloodline is the problem. Shit, Godfrey's got his own offspring that's separate from Marika that it has nothing wrong with her. I'm referring to Nefeli Loux, of course, but I don't think she came around till much later, and who knows if Marika even knew of her existence. As far as Marika was concerned, I think she was pretty sure there was something up with her bloodline by this point, and it seems to have specifically been her and not her other half / science project, Radagon, since his kids with Renala were coming out just fine, even producing one Empyrean. Now, I think this may be why she tried to have kids with herself again through Radagon. Maybe she was hoping, since he was the embodiment of order, that he could cancel out her curse. Well, either that or she just wanted more cursed children to play parts in her schemes. It's one of those up in the air things. So Marika sends Godfrey away, but realizes he's not the problem and develops this new use for him as her face-down trap card in case she's ever stopped by Radagon or perhaps one of her many enemies in the form of these meddling outer gods. Because really all of the cursed children she got were just the products of her own actions. It's like a sort of metaphorical revenge for the forces that she defeated but ultimately didn't kill. I mean, literally all of these curses happen as a sort of revenge for something Marika did in the past. She burned the Hornsent, she genocided the giants, except for the lesser ones who she turned into slaves, and she had her son Messmer burn the Church of the Bud. All these things lead directly to individual members of Marika's offspring being born with these curses. Mog and Morgott's obviously comes from what she did to the Hornsent. Melania's curse is due to the burning of the Church of the Bud, which leads to Ramana creating the Scarlet Rot. And last but not least, I think it's safe to assume that Marika inherited his flames from the fell god of the giants. But since they couldn't strike at Marika directly because she was a god, they could still target her children. So, in a way, it's sort of like all these old pagan gods taking their revenge against Marika for beating them, or, replacing or displacing them. Her lineage is forever cursed by her actions, and that even having a kid with Godfrey wasn't a guarantee that the offspring wouldn't be cursed or have some weird issue with them. Melena's situation, on the other hand, isn't quite as cut and dry. In fact, it seems to be a bit different from the quote-unquote curses of the other demigods. So, like her brother Messmer, she was born with a vision of fire. And fire was viewed as sort of forbidden under the government of the Erd Tree. I mean, priests who wound up with an unfortunate vision of fire wound up exiled, shunned, ridiculed, and mocked. Disgraced, if you will. So I'd imagine Marika's own child having this vision of fire was something to hide. And believe me, that's exactly what Marika did. But if all that wasn't enough, young Melanie here had a connection to destined death, which made Marika fear her a little bit, sort of like Reggie from the Umbrella Academy. And this culminated with Marika locking Melina up in a tower that I guess is less of a tower and more of like a giant elevator shaft. I mean, it's a pretty sweet office, the room she has. If we're being fair, it can't be that bad, and the place has a great aesthetic if you ask me. In Marika's defense, she's got this intense fear of death due to losing just about everybody she ever cared about to the Hornsent, and her daughter essentially being born as the personification of death itself probably scared the living shit out of her. But Marika knew she could still find a use for this daughter of her, or perhaps she did care about Melina in some small regard, but she was particularly motherly to her kids. So Marika decided the only thing she could realistically do with her daughter Melina is to lock her in that tower. Presumably after some undisclosed amount of time being imprisoned, Melina either sees the writing on the walls that her mother is going to eventually take even more extreme precautions to seal death away, or again, just Melina herself was tired of being imprisoned for just existing. So she ultimately decides to rebel against her mother, Marika. And she's not without her followers. In fact, she has some pretty cool henchmen. Her followers were known as the Godskin Apostles, and they were raised by her. They were literally swaddled in cloth made from the skin of dead gods, bred for a singular purpose, and in this case it was to bring death to the gods, while of course making sick fits out of stitching their skins together. Anyway, the Godskins, the oldest of which were referred to as the Nobles, were all imbued with Melina's signature black flame. And it's presumably because of this that they view her as their mother and their queen. She essentially led this vendetta against the gods, known only as the Gloam-Eyed Queen, which was a name that was probably given to her by her apostles who viewed her as their queen. And it's this name that she'll largely be remembered by in the Lands Between. In the end, the little rebellion didn't last very long, as Marika literally sicked her dog on her daughter. So Melina was defeated by the Bane of the Demigods, and looking back, this is probably where he got that title. Now, not much is known about this fight, but depending on who you ask, Melina possibly even had her Gloam Eye clawed out in the resulting scuffle. So many people believe that the Beast Eye given to us by Malekith in his disguise of Gurranq is the very same Gloam Eye that once belonged to Melina. And the main reason for that is the obvious similarities in the color of the eyes. It's also described as being claw-marked, which could have been from their fight, and it does react to the vestiges of destined death that are found in Deathroot. At the very least, it's an eye that's connected to destined death, much like the Gloam Eye is, which is why Malekith's hunters use it to hunt Deathroot. I like to imagine that the eye cannot be effectively destroyed because it's a part of the Root of Death, and so Malekith just made a cool little trinket out of it since he couldn't break it. Melina also doesn't seem to harbor any ill will towards Malekith, and why should she? She knows that Malekith is only going to do what her mother orders him to do. Marika had to make a judgment call. She sent her shadow beast Malekith to go defeat Melina, and ultimately the Rune of Death is bound. This resulted in that iconic strange curse seal marking thing being placed over her left eye, the infamous Gloam Eye. And it may actually be a scar or a brand or a burn from her fight with Malekith. Whatever it is, I think that its sole purpose is to either keep her from opening the eye or to keep her from opening the empty eye socket to put the eye back in. As long as Destined Death is bound, then that curse sign thing exists. So after all that, Destined Death is sealed away for the first time, and the Black Flame's powers are severely neutered. Melina herself's physical body is burnt away as punishment, or perhaps as part of the binding of Destined Death. Her memory is also fragmented and somewhat obscured to her. She seems to have access to most of her memories, especially those regarding her mother. It's sort of one of those situations where the only thing she can't remember is the only thing she needs to remember, and in this case, it's her purpose. One of the many reasons people theorize as to why she rebelled in the first place was that she was simply tired of waiting around for her designed purpose if it meant she had to live her life locked away in a tower in the Forbidden Lands. You can't really blame her, of course, but look what it got her. A burnt bodiless ghost whose only company is the spirit steed known as Torrent, that also used to belong to her mom. So the Golden Order as we know it was formed right around this time, and wouldn't begin to show the cracks for quite a while. That would be when Melina would find her own purpose. And I guess whether she planned it all or not, Marika still managed to find a use for her troublemaking daughter. I mean, you gotta hand it to her. Everything, especially her children, were chess pieces. They had purposes that they could serve and other uses, but that was as far as it went. She wasn't really motherly as far as I could tell, except for maybe towards Godwyn, which could be why he was killed. So before Marika gets herself stuck in the Erdtree, she entrusts Melina with the Spirit Steed whistle and a purpose to find a worthy Tarnish to strike a bargain with so he could take her to burn the Erdtree. Her ultimate purpose would finally be fulfilled. Now, if that purpose is denied for whatever reason, say you burn the Erdtree with the Frenzied Flame to specifically save Melina. Well, too bad she cannot be reasoned with in this scenario. Since at that point in the story, death has been unbound, she can finally open her glowing death eye again and proceed to hunt the player down for burning the world. Or if you believe that she lost it in the fight with Malekith, then she either retrieved it from Farum Azula or from the player's belongings, since they seemingly discarded their trusted Torrent ring. Either way, this is the only scenario in which she's alive at this point in the game to retrieve her eye. She's living proof of how hard it is to get rid of the Rune of Death. Vengeance Melina has a certain appeal to her. She's got the blue glowing eye, she's covered in ash, and her other eye, the Grace, has left completely because the very concept of Grace has been burned away completely. This cutscene rules. It's like the only true epilogue of the game, and it can very easily be missed even if you go through with the Frenzied Flame ending, because if you inherited the flame after Melina already burned the Erd Tree, then it's not like she's going to come back to life to hunt you down. There's a great close-up shot of Melina that they use where it shows that the cursed seal she had above her eye is gone, and the other eye is heavily dulled out gold. Her gloam eye is this bluish purple color, the very same color of the jewels worn by the Godskin apostles and nobles on their nice skin outfits. It's specifically her left eye, which also happens to be the very same eye that Messmer always keeps closed. And it's got me thinking that maybe the left eye in general has some sort of baseline connection to death, like it's their death eye. In Melina's case, this is a lot more literal than metaphorical, but look at this giant skeleton that's straight out of Japanese folklore. It can be summoned by mariners and the big red Albinaurics, and it fires a giant big ghost flame laser beam out of its left eye. So there's got to be some connection with the left eye and death or evil. It sort of reminds me of this old Italian superstition about the essentially left-handed people were touched by the devil or evil. And it might not even be exclusive to Italian culture. I think it's in other cultures as well. But generally the left side is seen as bad. The main reason I say it was probably inspired by this archaic Italian superstition, though, is because I believe the word left is referred to as sinistra in Italian, and that's already basically the word sinister. It's connected to this old world idea or belief that left-handed people were inherently evil. To put it in layman's terms, they basically believe that the left side is where the little devil on your shoulder would appear if you were a cartoon character.
Come on in, honey. Over here on what the Dagos call my sinister side.
Other cultures believe the left side is the spiritual and subconscious side, and because of that, that's usually the side they wear a type of charm to ward off negative notions and evil spirits, that type of thing. It would generally be worn on the left side, which to me kind of relates to how Messmer just keeps his left eye closed. Perhaps he's trying to ward off death or the invasive forces that are trying to take him over. I'm not sure if there's an overt connection to be made here or if it's just a nice little reference about the left side being the evil side, but it's just something I wanted to bring up, if however briefly, in the video. Anyway though, so one other interesting thing I noticed about Melina is that she doesn't seem to hate her flames like Messmer does, and on top of that, her flames aren't ever really referred to as a curse. Sure, it metaphorically became her curse, as it was the reason she was locked in a tower in the Forbidden Lands and labeled a Kindling Maiden, referencing of course her new purpose of burning the Erd Tree. But I noticed that, as far as I could tell, it's never been referred to as a curse for Melina or for the Gloam-Eyed Queen. I think her only curse was being born with this connection to destined death through the Black Flame. And it was only a curse because Marika wanted death suppressed. Although there are other possibilities, for example, like there could be some possible connection to Eiglay, the Serpent of Gelmir that Rykard fed himself to. Now, the only reason I mention this is because the Godskins themselves seem to have a connection with the Serpent Eiglay, as we see them either praying at the Church of the Big Snake or admiring the shed skin that's mounted there. I like to think this would line up with the idea of a snake meddling with the Erd Tree, you know, like the world serpent nibbling on Yggdrasil in Norse mythology, or even the snake being the mysterious temptation that's talked about in the trailer, which to me evokes Christianity. It's sort of like this blend of all religions. But ultimately we don't know. I mean, Marika kept Melina around presumably because she knew one day she would need her flames for something. As far as she was concerned, destined death was neutralized for now, but she could still find a purpose for her burnt-up daughter. Obviously, there wasn't much love lost between the two of them, but even so, Melina is quick to defend slights against Marika. I guess it would be a lot simpler if I just said that their relationship was complicated. Just like Mesmer, who outwardly loved her so much, but right before his death he cursed her name. This is kind of an inversion of that. And at the end of the day, I don't really know definitively if Melina and the Gloam-Eyed Queen are the same person, but it certainly seems that way. Originally, I was against the idea because it seemed too obvious, but really it's starting to look like the only possibility. It's just the timeline that isn't quite so clear-cut. All we know is that when the Golden Order was being formed, there was a whole Godskin rebellion thing that was put down by Malekith and Marika and resulted in the sealing of destined death and the burning into a bodiless form of the Gloam-Eyed Queen, who we believe to be Melina, who at several points in the story refers to herself as burnt and bodiless. It's also important to note that Melina wasn't just any offspring of Marika, she was an Empyrean. If she was the same person as the Gloam-Eyed Queen, that almost adds another layer to it. Because there's no way that Marika was going to let anybody replace her, even if it was one of her daughters, if it meant that they were going to start a regime based around destined death, or even just including destined death. You know, it's only the one thing Marika feared more than anything. I do genuinely think that Marika was afraid of Melina, you know, for the obvious reasons. And maybe Melina never even rebelled. Maybe Marika just decided that she was going to burn her, and Melina and her Godskins were just defending themselves. That's one of the greater mysteries. We just don't know. Melina is a great character, though. She's another perfect entry into the, From Software's long line of female level-up assistants. And she plays a pretty active part in the story, which is something we haven't seen since maybe Dark Souls 2's Emerald Herald. And even then, a bunch of the story stuff involving her got cut before release. But in many ways, Melina is an evolution of that. She's much more involved in the story than, for example, Dark Souls 3's Firekeeper, who is involved, but only really in the ending. And that's just one of the endings. Or the famous Bloodborne doll, who is going to feature heavily in my Gehrman video when I get around to finishing it. But yeah, in many ways, Melina is just the next step. She is not a passive participant in this narrative. And that's honestly what I love about this character. I mean, I didn't think about it much when I was first playing Elden Ring, but now that I finally had a chance to actually analyze the character, she's pretty fucking cool. Right off the bat, when we meet Melina, we learn that she doesn't play by the rules. She saves us for two reasons. One, because Torrent seems to like us, and the other is because we're tarnished and lack a maiden, which she finds to be an extremely lucky turn of events, and even remarks that they'd make the perfect candidate for her plans, even if it violates the Golden Order. She is someone who existed before the Golden Order was fully even established. In fact, it was only established after her defeat as the Gloam-Eyed Queen. I think that just makes her remark a lot cooler when she mentions it, even if it violates the Golden Order. She's extremely cunning and shrewd. She cuts a deal with the player. I mean, it's not like we have a lot of other options at that point, but it was still a shrewd move. I mean, look how it paid off for her. She's also fearless in combat, which gives her an edge over the other previous guide characters we've had. She's the only one of the demigods who actually fought Malekith and lived to tell the tale. She's also willing to fight her brother Morgott, and that's actually quite interesting because Morgott loves Marika, you know, more than anything, and he just wanted the Erdtree to love him back. Melina's got this complicated relationship with Marika, and ultimately probably thinks very little of Morgott for his obsession with something that threw him to the side and made him live in the sewers. I also noticed that in combat, Melina moves and fights exactly like a Black Knife assassin, except she also incorporates Marika-style Erdtree incantations. Her ceremonial dagger, the Dagger of Calling, is also very close in resemblance to the Black Knife assassin daggers. Now this obviously leads me to believe that there had to be some sort of connection between them, but what is the connection? Are they just inspired by Melina? Because aside from the similar movements and fighting style, I can't find any direct connections between Melina and the Black Knife assassins. Perhaps they were all handmaidens before she was burned away, or maybe they were all burned as well and that's why they don't really have a corporeal form. There's a reason I haven't covered the Black Knife assassins in too much detail yet because I'm still working on some of my theories. This is something that I just noticed and wanted to mention. There's plenty of fun little observations like that. I tried to catch as many of them as I could to fit in this video, but I think that's everything I wanted to say about these the two Children of Fire. Now again, I probably missed something or confused something or maybe mixed something up, but even if I didn't, please let me know in the comments. That's where the real magic happens, you know, I get a lot of insights reading those. But as always, if you liked the video, please like it. If you disliked it, please dislike it. And if you like hearing me ramble on about the various lore topics, occasional movie topics, and coming soon, lots of TV show topics, please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel out. We just hit the 30K, which is a hell of a milestone for me. And if for whatever reason you feel like helping support the channel, I've got a Patreon that I will link in the description. For now, that'll have like an exclusive weekly show where we just talk and ramble about stuff. There will be other little perks too as soon as I can think of more stuff, you know, stuff like video suggestions. You guys can suggest a video that you want to see made. You don't got to be a member of anything for that though. You can just make a suggestion in the comments, and if I like it enough, chances are a video might get made. It's mainly just a way to help support the channel in these uncertain times, but no one gives a shit about any of that. Let's have our outro and then the final thoughts and sneak peek at what's coming up next. So both of the next videos I got planned are almost done, actually. I know I haven't said such a thing in a while, but yes, that is the case. I was working on multiple projects at once again because I just can't help myself. The one that's closer to being done is about the corpses of the demigods as well as their legacies. It was just going to be about their corpses, but then I didn't really think that that would be enough for a full video. So I talked about their legacies as well. It's going to be pretty good, I think. Let's just hope I can come up with a good thumbnail for it. And the other video I got almost done is about the Amana Pyros, but it sort of became something else. Like I was talking about the Pyromancers of the Rise of the Dead, because they're like my favorite enemies in Dark Souls 2 to fight. They're just really cool. I might just make an edit with no commentary of just some awesome scenes of me fighting them, because it's just cinematic. It's a fun thing to do to blow off steam if you're playing a Souls game. Do 1v1s with the Amana Pyros. But yeah, the video sort of just evolved though into becoming this random lore facts in Dark Souls 2 video. So I'm going to try and bring the runtime of that one as high as I can while thinking of random lore facts and stuff and theories that fit into it. That'll definitely be a more laid back video. I mean, I just want to put all that good Dark Souls 2 footage I have to use. I also plan on making one called like Dream Logic and the you know, the narrative and setting of Dark Souls 2, because that's what I love the most about that game besides the weapons and armor. All too often, though, the game gets a bad rap. But yeah, if anything, though, next up will for sure be the Corpses of the Demigod video. And then I might have one on the Penguin, like as a full review. And of course, I think I already said that Prospect video I've been wanting to make. That I have the whole thing written out, I just need to record it. I think that's everything, though. I wanted to do a video about The Curse, which was a show I watched, I think, like almost a year ago now. I wanted to do a video at the time, but there was like no clips of it available on YouTube to use in my editing, and it was just, I was already getting overwhelmed with projects. But now I've had a year to marinate on it, and I'm currently rewatching it again, and I think I could come together with some decent insights and a somewhat well-edited video about it. But yeah, I can't recommend it enough. It's definitely weird, and it's got a lot of more subtle, anti-humor kind of cringe stuff in it, but it just works so well. But yeah, at this point I'm rambling and I didn't even realize that we've been on for about 40 minutes, so I think this is where I'm going to leave you guys. As always, I'll be back very soon with another new video that's hopefully just as intriguing as this one. But until then, I will bid you guys farewell, and I hope you are doing well, and I will see you next time. So yeah, see ya.